Great question. In the circle and the dot, and one of the main points that I made in reviewing the principle that I reviewed today about the protection of God, and God's will is a flashlight, not a crystal ball, and that is that God's main will for us, if we're living outside of the circle of his prescribed will for every believer, is to get back in the circle and don't worry about the dot. The question is, would God ever guide a Christian in a dramatic way who's outside of his will, but simply to guide them, to take them to another dot or to get them away from that dot? And the answer is absolutely. Absolutely. Because all is grace. He loves us. I would just thinking about my children and my grandchildren, if they're living outside of my will and I'm in an argument with them and they want to run out into the street, I'm not saying, well, I can't guide you. I'm grabbing them by the hand and I'm jerking them back. I know in my own life, I could just give you several indicators. In the life of Israel, in the history of Israel, there are several indicators. They're living totally outside of God's will, and God still protected them and moved them to another place, not because they were performing, but because he is in a covenant with them, and he loves us. So I just think it's true. When we're living outside of God's will and that happens, we're probably only going to see it in hindsight. Good night. He protected me a bit against marrying that guy. Or we're going to see it in hindsight when we report it to other Christians, and they say, well, of course, that's what God did.